think this is one of my favorite things about the Catholic Church. I walked in here like 10 minutes before we're going to start, and I'm like going through my mind of what did I say in last week's homily to push everybody away. And there's a lot of things I probably said, but I was like, no one's here. And then by the time we're processing it 10 minutes later, it's like we don't have enough room in the back. So I'm always appreciative of the fact that we always come in at that last moment. I'm making up for lost time myself on that. So, I think I've been noticing I have like this weird spiritual connection with Ryan, our choir director, over these past couple weeks, because all of his music has been extremely in tune with what I was going to talk about this for the gospel. Like last week, he played the song "Here I Am, Lord, I've heard you calling in the night," right? And that was our procession song. And it was 15 years to the day last week when I finally received the grace to break up with my girlfriend and drop out of college the same day. And when I did that, I walked over to the church, and I was so overcome with emotion, I just picked up the songbook in front of the tabernacle, and it was that song. And I sang it to Christ in front of the tabernacle. "Here I am, Lord, I've heard you calling in the night." And 15 years later, that song was played on the very day. And then today, what I really want to talk about is two things: purpose, how we're made for purpose in our life, and second, what is the purpose of the church. And the song that he chose, "The King of Love My Shepherd Is," was extremely intimate in this time of my life, because the first thing that I did when I went into seminary, like a week later, so about this time, was you go into the novitiates. This was in Connecticut. You're stripped away from family and friends. I could see my family 3 times, or talk to them 3 times a year, right? And so you're in 23 hours of silence for 2 years, and you don't have any contact with your friends, and it's a time of very intense intimacy with Christ. But I'd never felt myself stripped away from everything I ever loved in this world. And basically, after each meal, you have 150 guys, in this seminary where I was at. And so you're always washing dishes. And I was on the dish duty for like weeks in a row. And as we were just running through all those dishes, I was just covered in water and sweat and old food, and it just felt so gross. But I had just heard that song for the first time in Mass when I'd gone to the seminary, "The King of Love My Shepherd Is." And I would just sing that in my mind every single day when I was doing those dishes as a meditation. It just happened to be the song that we processed in today. But what hit me more than anything when I was singing that was I couldn't believe how happy I was. I couldn't believe how joyful and how peaceful I was in the midst of being stripped away from everything in my life. And even before that in college, we'd get up at like 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. on a daily basis. And that was early. I remember for Lent, I woke up at 8:30, and I thought I was doing like the greatest sacrifice for our Lord. And then I went to seminary, and every morning we had to get up at 5:15 in the morning. Every single day to go to do 2 hours of prayer before Mass, and then studies and everything like that. And nothing ever filled me with more desire and love than waking up at 5:15. And that's something that stayed with me. I even got a text message from one of the students last night, saw it this morning, and it said, "Father, I'm actually concerned about you. I heard that you're not sleeping so much and that you're getting up too early, and I just want to give you like this health advice on how you can take care of your body." And I look at the time, I'm like, dude, you wrote this text message at 12:45 in the morning. All right, that's like texting me from McDonald's saying you're worried about my weight, at this point. So I found that a little bit ironic. But the thing is, like, I can still wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning every day, except Mondays, because I'm so filled with a love for my life. Following Jesus Christ, being called to be a priest, has been the greatest gift I've ever known. And it's filled me with more zeal and love for life and my purpose than anything else I ever had before that. And it's remained even 15 years later, and that still blows my mind. But Fyodor Dostoevsky once said this, and I think it really touches into purpose. It says, "For the secret of man's being is not only to live, but to have something to live for. Without a stable conception of your purpose in life, man would not consent to even go on living and would rather destroy himself than remain on earth, even though all of his desires were fulfilled. That's why the world can give us and promise us all the pleasures it can, and it's really good at giving us pleasures, especially in our times. But what the world can never offer us is a purpose, an ultimate purpose for why we are here and what is the object of our life. And the more we come into tune with what is my purpose here, that's what goes in the deepest part of our being and gives us the deepest joy and the hope and the reason to wake up every morning. And we see this in the gospel very clearly. That we could think that the guys who showed up the last hour and got paid the same, it's just, the same as the people who bore the heat of the sun and all that they really did get the better deal of it all, right? And it's just about God's mercy, and we need to accept how he treats everyone fairly in the end who comes to work with him. But I think that they suffered more than the people who were working in the vineyard. Because these men, by the way, these day laborers, this isn't just a random parable. This was a real thing in Christ's times. That there were men with wives and children who had to go out and just stand on the street corners every morning waiting for somebody to hire them. Slaves had a better life than day laborers. Why do you think that is? Because they were guaranteed. They were guaranteed work every day. They were guaranteed a land. They were guaranteed food and stability for their family. But a day laborer didn't have that. All he had was the hope that I could get enough work in one day to feed my family. But I think it's an image of that there's nothing more harmful to the human person than to be waiting for a purpose. To just be sitting out there with nothing to draw them out, with no mission. I think they suffered more intellectually than the ones who were actually bearing the heat of the sun every single day. There's nothing more harmful for us as human beings than to not have a purpose, an occupation, because we're made for work. We're made to give ourselves. Right? Even John Paul II spoke about this all the time, that man is made to make a gift of himself, and his life is fruitless and unfulfilled until he finds that way to make himself a gift. And that's why I love the Catholic Church so much. The Catholic Church gave me my purpose in life, the deepest purpose I ever could have dreamed of. Right? So the first point is we are made for purpose. The world cannot offer us a purpose. The best that it can say is find something that inspires you and go for that. And hopefully it carries you through to the end. But in the end, we know that it's just our making of it, our discovery. But only in God, only in Jesus Christ, do we discover the deepest purpose of our life when we enter into the vineyard of the church. And so what is the work of Christ? What is the vineyard that we're called to work on? The church has one fundamental mission and goal. What do you think it is? Scream it out. Baptist Church today. What do you think? What is the purpose of the Catholic Church? Salvation of souls, evangelization, apostolate. To know God, to love God, and to serve God, and to be happy with Him in heaven. Our purpose in this life is to work first for our own salvation and the salvation of everyone that God, by His providence, connects with our life, whether it be family or friends or just strangers we run into. Everything is secondary to that. And the Catholic Church has been responsible to do so many good things. If you ever want to find a good book, How the Catholic Church Built the Western Civilization. If you want to know more about that, talk to Terry Hefner. He's reading it right now. But it's a beautiful book about how the Catholic Church was responsible for building up all the hospitals, the whole hospital system. That's why you have saint in front of many of the hospitals, even around here. The schooling system. You're welcome. College right now. The monks gave us that. Right? Orphanages. The nuns. The Catholic Church has built up so much of what we have in this world, but it was always as a means to one end. which is the salvation of souls. But the second that we put anything before that, the second we put any human endeavor or human prosperity or social justice endeavor or equality or overcoming injustice in this world above the salvation of souls, the Catholic Church loses its identity because it loses its purpose. What did Satan offer Christ in the garden? In the desert. Become a Messiah of bread, of social justice. Give them food. Be a worldly Messiah. Or talk about politics. Take over the governments. And it's such a strong temptation for all of us. It's not just, it was a temptation for the Son of God. It was a temptation. And I think it's because it's right in front of us. It's really hard to talk about salvation of souls, but it's easier to give somebody some bread. Right? It's easier to feel like I'm doing something for the people around me if it's a material satiation of that moment. Or that's why I think politics is getting so important in our times, because we're no longer talking about religion. And so we feel like we have more control if we're the ones pushing certain people into office and taking others out. But in the end, it's this temptation to find our purpose in something less than the mission of the church, which is the salvation of my soul and the souls entrusted in my care. We could do everything right for somebody. Give them all the food, all the money, fulfill every one of their desires, and set them up for success. But if we do not give them Jesus Christ, if we do not give them the gospel, what about their souls? When Jesus Christ says, "What profit a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his very soul?" The Catholic Church is all about building up this world and building up human needs and striving for equality in every way, secondary after salvation of souls, and as a means to the salvation of souls. And that's why I think one of the greatest dangers that we have to the vineyard of the church is this idea of universal salvation that's just overcome our culture, this whole coexist. I want to see one of those coexist stickers with like a Nazi symbol and a communist symbol and a Democrat symbol and a Republican symbol, and see how people respond to that. Let's just all get along here. It's ridiculous, right? Because it could never go to, and yet we say that we can do that with religion. Won't work. The more we focus on politics, the more we just say, well, hopefully God will just do his own thing in getting us all to heaven. That's not what Jesus Christ taught us. And St. Paul is very clear. Is what is my purpose on this earth? He said, if it was up to me, I would want to die. I want to be with Jesus Christ in heaven. And I'm conflicted because I want to be there. But I know for your sake, it's better that I stay. It's better that I stay so that I labor for your salvation. I think one of the reasons celibacy is so important for priests is the same reason that, great cops and firemen and superheroes, and priests were all on the same level. One of the reasons they always drop down is once they have a kid. I once heard a cop say this, and you see this reflected in superhero films. He said, "The day I realized I can't be a cop anymore was the day that I had my child with my wife. Because now I realized there was something more important than my life waiting for me at home. And I couldn't be as reckless as I was before in my mission." We priests, we don't got to worry about that, right? And so we have to be on the front line for the salvation of souls. And St. Paul, who was also a chaste man, and Christ who called many celibate men to follow him, it was so that celibacy is very hard because it separates you from the earth. You never feel fully grounded in a family. But that suffering is necessary so that you're always longing for heaven more than earth. That's the point of it, to enter into the loneliness of existence, to long for God. And then Jesus Christ truly becomes the most important thing in your life. And you're free to get in trouble and be sent away in many different places because of what you say. Not me reflected in that, because I never walked the line or anything like that. And so, because you're not tied down to any place. That's the whole point. So Padre Pio, we also celebrated his feast day yesterday. He was a man who was called from the very early dawn of his life, one of those first men that God, the landowner, went out to call when he was a boy. Well, even when he was like 5 years old, he could just talk to Jesus and Mary, and even St. Francis appeared to him. All right, so he was surprised. He thought everybody could just have face-to-face conversation with the saints. But even the devils, the demons, from when he was a boy, would appear to him as wild dogs and whatnot and run after him. And St. Padre Pio was a man who lived in the 20th century. In 1918, just a year after he was a priest, he received the stigmata. And Christ told him to hold on to the stigmata for 50 years. 50 years to the day that it would not be healed. Lost over a pint of blood every single day. Always smelled like roses. He could read people's souls in confession and tell them their sins. His masses, they had to move them to 2 a.m. in the morning because so many people came, and they were 3 hours long because he would actually experience the sacrifice of Christ when he'd go into the Mass. He'd see Christ on Calvary and feel the pains in his own body. And he could actually see the bread changing into the body of Christ and the wine changing into the blood of Christ. Just caught up into ecstasy in every single Mass. But the reason that God, if anyone ever has doubts on the reality of the faith, look up St. Padre Pio and try to explain that. But God gave him as a witness to our times, as a reality to what the church is about, to what it offers. And he dedicated himself to nothing but confession, the forgiveness of sins, the offering of Mass, and the interceding for his people. He was a true worker, labor from his infancy. And this was his purpose. He wrote down in his diary, "Now, my dear Father, I want to ask you permission for something. For some time past, I have felt the need to offer myself to the Lord as a victim for poor sinners and for the souls in purgatory. This desire has been growing continually in my heart, so it has now become what I would call a strong passion." And he just felt that he had to offer his entire life, all of his sufferings, as a victim soul for the salvation of others. And this is something we see in all the great saints. The closer they get to the heart of Christ, the only thing that fills their mind is, how can I save my soul and the souls of all those entrusted to my care? So we're all here in a Catholic church, in a sense, the vineyard. But I think the question for us here today, at all different ages, different times in our life, which is exactly what the gospel talks about, how is my mindset for working in the vineyard of the Lord? Do I really see that the most important purpose of my life is to get to heaven and to save my family by my example, by my witness, by my love? The salvation of souls, is that the most important purpose of my life? May we all be able to say with St. Paul from today's readings, "For to me life is Christ, and death is gain. If I go on living in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. I long to depart this life and to be with Christ, for that is far better. Yet that I remain in the flesh is more necessary for your benefit. I long to be in heaven with Christ, but I remain on this earth to work for you, to labor for the salvation of souls." For that is the ultimate purpose of the Catholic Church and of every one of our lives.